high in the Andes Mountains, where the air thins and the sun blazes with an intensity that seems almost divine, there once stood a temple unlike any the world had ever seen. The walls gleamed with sheets of hammered gold, reflecting the mountain light in a display so brilliant that Spanish chroniclers would later describe it as fabulous beyond belief. This was the Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun in Cusco, and it represented the beating heart of an empire's relationship with a metal that Europeans saw as wealth incarnate, but which the Incas understood as something far more profound, the physical manifestation of their sun god's very essence. The story of Incan gold is not merely a tale of precious metal extracted from mountain veins. It is a narrative that encompasses spirituality and conquest, craftsmanship and greed, cultural identity, and colonial devastation. It is a story that begins with reverence and ends with melting crucibles, yet somehow persists in legend and memory, refusing to be entirely consumed by the fires of history. To understand Incan gold is to understand how two civilizations could look at the same substance and see entirely different things. One saw a sacred connection to the divine, a material that bridged the gap between earthly existence and celestial realms. The other saw portable wealth, a means to finance empires and satisfy an insatiable appetite for riches. The Inca Empire, at its zenith in the early 16th century, stretched from modern-day Colombia to Chile, encompassing roughly 12 million people across some of the most challenging terrain on Earth. The Incas had conquered this vast domain through a combination of military prowess, diplomatic cunning, and administrative genius. They built roads that connected mountain peaks to coastal valleys, engineered agricultural terraces that fed millions, and constructed cities like Machu Picchu that seemed to defy gravity itself. Yet for all their achievements in engineering and statecraft, perhaps nothing captures the imagination quite like their relationship with gold. For the Incas, gold was not currency. It held no commercial value in the way Europeans understood wealth. The Inca economy functioned through a complex system of reciprocal labor obligations and agricultural production, with control over land and food, representing true power and social status. Gold, by contrast, occupied an entirely different sphere of meaning. The Incas called it the sweat of the sun, a poetic description that reveals the depth of their cosmological understanding. This wasn't metaphorical language or fanciful imagery, it was literal truth within the Inca worldview. Gold was understood as the physical substance that emanated from Inti, their sun god, the supreme deity who gave life to the world and legitimacy to their rulers. The spiritual significance of gold permeated every aspect of how it was used and displayed. Only the Sapa Inca, the emperor who claimed direct descent from Inti himself, could wear gold jewelry during his lifetime. Even the wealthiest nobles, men who controlled vast territories and commanded armies, could not adorn themselves with this sacred metal until they were laid to rest in their burial chambers. This restriction wasn't simply about maintaining social hierarchy, though it certainly served that purpose. More fundamentally, it reflected the understanding that gold was too sacred for casual use, too intimately connected with the divine to be reduced to mere personal ornamentation. To comprehend the role of gold in Inca civilization, one must first understand their intricate cosmological beliefs. The Incas saw the universe as a carefully balanced system of opposing yet complementary forces. Day and night, sun and moon, male and female, gold and silver. These dualities structured their understanding of reality. In this framework, gold represented the masculine solar power, the active life-giving force that animated the world. Silver, by contrast, was associated with the moon and femininity, completing the cosmic balance. This cosmological understanding found its most spectacular expression in the Coricancha, the temple of the sun, that stood at the literal and symbolic center of Cusco. The very name Coricancha translates to golden enclosure or golden courtyard, and this naming was no exaggeration. Historical accounts describe a structure of almost impossible opulence. More than 700 sheets of beaten gold, each measuring approximately half a metre square and weighing around 2 kilograms, covered the temple's outer walls. Inside, the walls of the primary sanctuary were similarly adorned, creating an interior space that must have seemed to glow with captured sunlight. The temple complex housed multiple chambers, each dedicated to different celestial deities. The Temple of the Sun occupied the largest space, containing a massive golden disc that represented Inti himself. This wasn't a mere decorative element, it was understood as an actual manifestation of the sun god's presence on Earth. The temple also included chambers dedicated to the moon goddess, to the stars, to thunder and lightning. Each space was adorned appropriately, with the moon temple featuring silver decorations that complemented the golden brilliance of the sun sanctuary. But perhaps the most remarkable feature of the Coricancha was its ceremonial garden, a space that represented the pinnacle of Inca goldsmithing art. Chroniclers describe a garden filled with life-size replicas of plants and animals, all crafted from gold and silver. There were fields of corn with golden stalks, their individual kernels meticulously fashioned from the precious metal. There were life-sized llamas in silver, their coats textured to capture the appearance of actual wool. There were golden birds perched in silver trees, golden insects crawling among golden flowers, jaguars, guinea pigs, monkeys, butterflies, an entire ecosystem rendered in precious metal, creating a space where the natural world and the divine realm merged in metallic perfection. This garden served multiple purposes in Inca religious life. It was a place of offering, where priests would conduct ceremonies to honor Inti and ensure the sun's continued blessing on the empire. It was also a demonstration of the Sapa Inca's divine mandate, his special relationship with the sun god that manifested in his ability to command the creation of such magnificent works. Every golden cornstalk proclaimed the emperor's connection to the cosmic forces that governed agricultural abundance. Every silver llama testified to his role as intermediary between the human and divine realms. The religious ceremonies conducted at the Coricancha were complex affairs that involved the entire Inca elite. During the Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun celebrated during the June winter solstice, the Sapa Inca would lead a grand procession from the main square of Cusco to the inner courtyard of the temple. There, seated on a bench alongside the mummified bodies of his ancestors, yes, mummified ancestors who were treated as if still alive and participating in state affairs, the emperor would conduct rituals that included the sacrifice of llamas, and on certain occasions, children brought from distant provinces as the ultimate offering to the sun god. The priests who maintained the Coricancha and conducted its daily rituals were not casual functionaries. They belonged to a specialized religious class that had been trained from youth in the intricate ceremonies and astronomical observations required for their role. The temple complex served as an astronomical observatory, with its structures precisely aligned to track solstices, equinoxes, and the movements of celestial bodies that were crucial for agricultural planning and ceremonial timing. The Incas understood the heavens with remarkable precision, identifying constellations within the Milky Way that they called the Celestial River, seeing in its dark clouds the silhouettes of animals drinking from its waters. The golden splendor of the Coricancha and countless other Inca treasures didn't simply materialize through divine will. Behind every gleaming artifact stood generations of accumulated metallurgical knowledge and the skilled hands of a master craftsman who had refined their techniques to a level that, in some ways, surpassed contemporary European metalworking. The Inca Empire controlled vast mineral resources across its territory. The highlands of the Andes, formed through millions of years of tectonic activity, held rich deposits of gold, silver, copper, and other metals. Major mining operations were concentrated in the southern region of the empire, known as Suyu, which encompassed parts of modern-day Peru, Bolivia, and northern Chile. These weren't small-scale operations. The Incas organised mining on an industrial scale, mobilising labour forces through their mita system of reciprocal work obligations. Mining techniques varied depending on the type of deposit and the terrain. For placer gold, the fine flakes and nuggets found in riverbeds and streams, miners would pan the waters flowing from the Andes, using techniques similar to those employed by prospectors worldwide. The rivers of the southeastern region, particularly the Inca Empire and its tributaries, yielded significant quantities of alluvial gold that required relatively simple extraction methods. For lode deposits, where gold was embedded in rock veins within the mountains, the work was considerably more demanding. Inca miners would follow these veins deep into the earth, digging shafts and tunnels using tools made from wood, stone, and a copper. They lacked iron and steel, yet they managed to extract gold from some of the most challenging environments on the planet, working at altitudes where modern miners would require supplemental oxygen. The smelting process required its own specialised knowledge. Inca metallurgists had discovered that they could use the high-altitude winds of the Andes to their advantage. They built furnaces on hilltops and mountain ridges where natural wind patterns created strong, consistent air currents. These winds would be channeled through carefully designed vents, achieving temperatures high enough to smelt ore without requiring mechanical bellows. Alternatively, smelters would use blowpipes, long tubes through which they would blow air to intensify the heat of their furnaces. For fuel, the Incas made an interesting choice that reflected their environmental awareness and practical ingenuity. While wood was used, they also relied heavily on dried llama dung, which burned hot and was available in abundance throughout their territory. This choice of fuel might seem humble, but it proved remarkably effective for metallurgical purposes. Recent archaeological research has uncovered evidence suggesting that Inca metalworkers may have employed mercury amalgamation to extract gold from ore, a sophisticated technique that wouldn't become widespread in Europe until the 12th century. By mixing finely ground gold ore with liquid mercury, they could create an amalgam that separated the precious metal from surrounding rock. Heating this amalgam would cause the mercury to boil away, leaving behind relatively pure gold. This technique allowed the extraction of gold from lower-grade ores that would have been impractical to process through simple melting. But extraction was only the beginning. The true artistry emerged in what Inca goldsmiths could do with the raw metal once it had been refined. These craftsmen had mastered a remarkable range of techniques that allowed them to create objects of extraordinary beauty and complexity. Their primary method was sheet metalwork, in which they would hammer gold into extremely thin sheets, sometimes just fractions of a millimetre thick. This required immense skill and patience, as the metal had to be repeatedly heated and cooled to prevent it from becoming brittle and cracking. Through a technique called repoussé, artisans would hammer designs from the back of these sheets, creating raised patterns on the front surface. A complementary technique called chasing allowed them to refine these designs by working from the front, adding detail and texture. The result was three-dimensional artwork created from flat metal, with faces, feathers, and intricate patterns emerging from the golden surface. The Incas also became masters of alloying, mixing gold with copper or silver to create tumbaga, which could be manipulated to display different colours and properties. Through a process involving heat treatment and chemical washes, they could make tumbaga objects appear to be pure gold by drawing the precious metal to the surface. This technique, sometimes called depletion gilding, created a golden skin over a copper-rich core, allowing artisans to produce larger objects while conserving gold. Lost wax casting represented another crucial technique in the Inca goldsmiths' repertoire. Artisans would create a detailed model in wax, encase it in clay, then heat the assembly until the wax melted away, leaving a negative mould. Molten metal poured into this mould would take the exact shape of the original wax model. This process allowed for the creation of complex three-dimensional forms that would have been nearly impossible to achieve through hammering alone. The Inca state organised its craftsmen with the same systematic efficiency it brought to all aspects of imperial administration. When the Incas conquered new territories, they didn't simply loot existing treasures and leave. They identified the most skilled metalworkers in the conquered regions and relocated them to Cusco or other imperial centres. Master goldsmiths from the coastal Chimu kingdom, bronze workers from highland provinces, silversmiths from various valleys, all found themselves resettled to work directly for the state, their skills now mobilised in service of imperial projects. This concentration of expertise created workshops where knowledge could be shared and techniques refined. The state provided these craftsmen with raw materials and supported them while they worked, but in return, everything they produced belonged to the Inca ruler. The objects these artisans created weren't destined for markets or individual customers. They served religious functions, diplomatic purposes, or became part of the imperial treasury. The surviving examples of Inca goldwork, though tragically few given the quantities that once existed, testify to the extraordinary skill of these craftsmen. There are delicate figurines of men and women, their clothing and features rendered with meticulous attention to detail. There are ceremonial cups called keros, used in royal toasts and religious rituals. There are elaborate masks representing gods and mythical beings. There are miniature llamas and alpacas so finely crafted that individual strands of wool seem to be visible in the metal. Each piece represents not merely technical skill, but artistic vision, an ability to transform raw material into objects that carried profound spiritual and cultural meaning. The year 1532 brought a fatal encounter between two worlds that understood gold in fundamentally incompatible ways. Francisco Pizarro, a Spanish conquistador with a checkered past and burning ambition, led a force of approximately 168 men into the heart of the Inca Empire. The Spanish had heard tales of fabulous wealth in the mountains of Peru, stories that promised riches beyond imagination. What they found surpassed even their inflated expectations, but it came at the cost of one of history's most tragic cultural destructions. Pizarro's timing was devastatingly perfect. The Inca Empire, which had seemed invincible just years earlier, was tearing itself apart in civil war. The emperor, Huayna Capac, had died suddenly, possibly from smallpox that had spread south from European contact zones in the Caribbean and Central America, reaching the Andes before the conquistadors themselves. His death left the empire divided between two of his sons, Huáscar, the legitimate heir born of the emperor's sister wife, and Atahualpa, an illegitimate son who commanded the loyalty of battle-hardened northern armies. The civil war that erupted between these brothers was brutal and exhaustive. By the time Atahualpa finally defeated Huáscar in 1532, the empire had been severely weakened. Armies that should have been defending borders were deployed against each other. Administrative systems were disrupted. Local populations, particularly those who had been conquered relatively recently and bore grudges against Inca rule, saw an opportunity to settle old scores. Into this chaos rode Pizarro and his small force of conquistadors. They had several advantages beyond their opportune timing. Their steel weapons and armour provided significant military advantages against Inca forces equipped with bronze and stone weapons. Their horses, never before seen in South America, terrified indigenous warriors in initial encounters. Their firearms and cannons, while slow to load and not always reliable, produce psychological effects out of proportion to their actual battlefield effectiveness. But perhaps their greatest advantage was strategic audacity combined with ruthless deception. Pizarro requested a meeting with Atahualpa at the city of Cajamarca in northern Peru. Atahualpa, fresh from his victory over Huascar and commanding an army of tens of thousands, saw no threat in meeting with this small band of strangers. He agreed to enter Cajamarca with an escort of several thousand unarmed men, expecting a diplomatic encounter. What he walked into was a carefully planned trap. On November 16, 1532, as Atahualpa's procession entered the main square of Cajamarca, the Spanish struck. Hidden soldiers emerged from buildings, surrounding the plaza, firing guns and cannons while cavalry charged into the densely packed indigenous forces. In the confined space, with no weapons to defend themselves, thousands of Incas were slaughtered in what historians often describe less as a battle than as a massacre. Atahualpa himself was captured, plucked from his golden litter by Spanish soldiers who cut down the nobles carrying him. Held prisoner in Cajamarca, Atahualpa quickly grasped what motivated his captors. These strange men with their pale faces and incomprehensible language were obsessed with gold and silver in a way that must have seemed bizarre to Inca understanding. Gold, which the Incas saw as sacred, these foreigners treated as merchandise. Hoping to secure his release and persuade the Spanish to leave his territory, Atahualpa made an offer that would become legendary. He proposed to fill a room with gold and 2 additional rooms with silver in exchange for his freedom. The room in question measured approximately 6 meters long by 4.5 meters wide. Atahualpa promised to fill it to a height as high as he could reach, roughly 2.5 meters above the floor. It was an astronomical ransom, a quantity of precious metal that would have bankrupted European kingdoms. Pizarro agreed to the terms. Word went out across the empire, from temples and palaces, from sacred sites and imperial storehouses, gold began flowing into Cajamarca. Porters carried golden artifacts along the magnificent road system the Incas had built, those same roads now serving to facilitate the empire's plundering. The procession of treasures streaming into the city must have been a sight beyond comprehension. Llama trains laden with golden plates stripped from temple walls, porters carrying sacred statues and ceremonial vessels, nobles bringing offerings from their local shrines. The Incas weren't being forced to hand over family heirlooms or personal wealth. For them, this was sacred material being surrendered to barbarians who couldn't possibly appreciate its significance. Many indigenous people reportedly didn't even consider it theft, because gold held no commercial value in their economy. It was material connected to religious observance and imperial authority, but not to personal enrichment or family inheritance in the way Europeans understood property. Over several months, the ransom accumulated. Spanish chroniclers who witnessed it struggled to describe the sheer quantity of gold and silver that poured into Cajamarca. By the time collection was complete, the Spanish had assembled approximately 6 tons of gold and twice that weight in silver. The gold alone, with a purity averaging 22.5 carats, was valued at over 1.3 million gold pesos, a sum that translates to somewhere around $300 million in modern currency, though such conversions fail to capture the true magnitude of wealth in 16th century terms. The mechanical accounting. Records kept by Spanish notaries provide precise documentation of this plunder. They list every item, every weight, every value calculated according to Spanish reckoning. These documents stand as perhaps the most detailed inventory of a civilization's cultural heritage being systematically looted, item by bureaucratic item. But Atahualpa's hope that this ransom would secure his freedom proved tragically misplaced. Pizarro had no intention of releasing the Inca Emperor. Atahualpa, alive, represented a potential focal point for resistance. Atahualpa, free, could rally his armies and drive the Spanish from his lands. Moreover, rumours reached Spanish ears that a large Inca army was approaching Cajamarca, possibly to rescue their captured ruler. On July 26, 1533, after a mock trial on charges of conspiracy and plotting rebellion, Atahualpa was executed. The Spanish offered him a choice: burn at the stake as a pagan or convert to Christianity and receive the more merciful death of garroting. Atahualpa accepted baptism and was strangled to death in Cajamarca's central plaza, the same place where he had been captured 8 months earlier. Even before Atahualpa's execution, the Spanish had begun the systematic destruction of Inca artistic heritage. The magnificent golden artifacts that had accumulated in Cajamarca, the ceremonial vessels, the sacred statues, the elaborate decorative pieces representing generations of skilled craftsmanship, were all melted down. The Spanish built 9 large forges and spent weeks reducing the treasures to uniform ingots. Faces of gods disappeared into the crucible. Intricate patterns hammered by master artisans liquefied into anonymous metal. The cultural and artistic value meant nothing. What mattered was weight and purity. The distribution of this melted gold followed Spanish customs. The Spanish crown received its royal fifth, as stipulated in contracts with conquistadors. Pizarro took 7 times the share of a cavalryman. Individual foot soldiers received approximately 20 kilograms of gold each, a fortune that would have set them up for life in Spain. Cavalrymen received roughly 41 kilograms, but the total distributed among the conquistadors, though staggering, represented only a fraction of the gold that had once adorned Inca temples and palaces. The destruction didn't end with Atahualpa's ransom. As the Spanish consolidated their conquest, they systematically stripped gold from the Coricancha and other sacred sites. The 700 golden sheets that had covered the Sun Temple walls were pried loose and melted. The Golden Garden, with its life-size metal plants and animals, was dismantled and destroyed. Chroniclers describe convoys of precious metal leaving Cusco, heading for the coast and eventual shipment to Spain. Conservative estimates suggest that in just over 40 years following the conquest, the Spanish extracted and shipped home over 100 million gold items and more than 200 million silver items from the former Inca territories. Treasure ships laden with South American precious metals cross the Atlantic regularly, feeding Spain's economy and transforming global power dynamics. Many of these ships would never reach their destination, falling victim to storms, privateers, or navigational errors. Even today, treasure hunters search for Spanish wrecks that might contain Inca gold lying at the bottom of the ocean. Ironically, this massive influx of precious metal didn't secure Spain's position as a dominant world power in the long term. The Spanish spent their American wealth rather than investing it in productive enterprises. They imported exotic spices, trading a pound of spices for an ounce of gold. They bought Chinese porcelain and Indian textiles. They built elaborate churches and palaces. They waged wars. But they never developed the industrial capacity that would later make other European nations dominant. The gold flowed through Spain and dispersed across the world, enriching traders in China, India, and the Ottoman Empire, while Spain itself eventually declined into financial crisis. Much of the melted Inca gold was transformed into other forms that now sit in museums and private collections, often unrecognized for what they once were. Chinese jewelry and coins from the 16th century contain gold that may have once decorated the Coricancha. Indian gold bangles, created as portable wealth storage in a tradition that continues today, might incorporate metal that was once an Inca sacred offering. Spanish churches built in the 16th and 17th centuries feature gold and silver decorations that originated in Andean temples. Not all of the Incas' gold made it into Spanish hands. According to persistent legends, significant treasures were hidden as news of Atahualpa's execution spread across the empire. These stories tell of Inca generals and loyal nobles who, upon learning that the Spanish had betrayed their promise and murdered the emperor, halted the delivery of gold, still en route to Cajamarca. Some accounts speak of these treasures being thrown into sacred lakes to prevent Spanish acquisition. Others describe them being hidden in secret mountain caves, their locations known only to indigenous people who passed the knowledge down through generations. The most famous of these legends centers on the Langanites mountain range in Ecuador, a treacherous region of dense cloud forest and sheer mountain faces. According to the story, General Rumiñahui, one of Atahualpa's commanders, led a desperate mission to hide the final and largest portion of the ransom after hearing of the emperor's death. In the Langanites' remote wilderness, his forces supposedly concealed treasures worth an estimated $5 billion in today's currency. About 50 years after Atahualpa's execution, a Spanish man named José Valverde claimed to have been shown the location of this hidden treasure by his Inca father-in-law as a wedding gift. Valverde apparently became quite wealthy, lending credibility to his story. Before he died, he left written directions to the treasure site, a document known as the Derrotero de Valverde. Countless treasure hunters have attempted to follow these directions, searching for the cache Valverde described, a lake made by human hands, into which the Incas supposedly threw gold they had prepared for Atahualpa's ransom upon learning of his death. In 1886, a Canadian named Barth Blake claimed to have found the treasure, writing letters that described thousands of gold and silver pieces of Inca and pre-Inca handicraft, the most beautiful goldsmith works you are not able to imagine. He described life-size human figurines, birds and other animals, flowers, cornstalks, the most incredible jewelry, and golden vases filled with emeralds. But Blake said the treasure was too massive for him to remove alone, that even thousands of men couldn't move it all. He left, planning to return to New York to raise funds for a proper expedition, but mysteriously disappeared en route, some saying he was pushed overboard from his ship. In the 21st century, modern treasure hunters continue searching the Langanites. The mountains regularly claim lives, with their earthquakes, landslides, and treacherous terrain making exploration extraordinarily dangerous. Author Mark Honigsbaum wrote an entire book, Valverde's Gold, about his expedition to find the treasure in the early 2000s. He never located it, acknowledging that regular seismic activity in the region may have permanently altered the landscape, making Valverde's centuries-old directions obsolete. Another persistent legend speaks of Paititi, a lost city where the Incas supposedly fled when they realized they couldn't resist Spanish invasion. According to these stories, Paititi became a final refuge filled with gold and treasures, hidden somewhere beyond the Andes in the dense Amazon rainforest. Famous explorers like Percy Fawcett, who disappeared in the Amazon in 1925, and more recent adventurers like Thierry Jamin have led expeditions searching for this mythical city, but Paititi remains as elusive as the Langanites' gold. Lake Titicaca, the massive high-altitude body of water straddling the Peru-Bolivia border, features in similar legends. Stories claim that during the conquest, Incas threw gold into the lake's depths to prevent Spanish seizure. In 2013, archaeologists did discover ceremonial objects submerged in Lake Titicaca, proving that underwater offerings were indeed part of Inca religious practice. However, no significant quantities of gold have been found, leaving the larger treasure stories in the realm of legend, rather than confirmed reality. While these lost treasure tales capture the imagination, the real legacy of Inca gold lives on in museums, archaeological sites, and cultural memory. Despite the staggering quantities melted down by the Spanish, some artifacts survived. They exist today in collections around the world: the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the British Museum in London, the Museo Laco in Lima, and numerous other institutions that house pieces of pre-Columbian goldwork. In Peru itself, the preservation and study of Inca artifacts has become a matter of national importance and cultural identity. The Gold Museum in Lima, formerly known as the Gold Museum of Peru and Arms of the World, was founded by diplomat Miguel Mujica Gallo in the 1960s to house his extensive private collection. With more than 7,000 artifacts, including pieces from the Inca Empire and earlier cultures like the Moche, Sican, and Chimu, the museum provides visitors with a glimpse of the artistic and technical achievements that once filled Inca temples and palaces. The Coricancha itself, though stripped of its golden covering, remains a powerful sight. Today, it exists in a fascinating hybrid form, with the church and convent of Santo Domingo built directly atop the Inca foundations. Remarkably, while the Spanish colonial structures have suffered significant damage from earthquakes over the centuries, the Inca stonework beneath remains virtually intact, a testament to their superior engineering. Visitors can walk through spaces that once served as the spiritual center of an empire, seeing the precise stonework and understanding the layout of temples that were once covered in precious metal. The cultural impact of Inca gold extends far beyond museum displays and archaeological sites. In modern Andean communities, particularly in Peru, the memory of the Inca Empire and its relationship with gold forms a crucial part of cultural identity. The Spanish conquest is remembered not just as a military defeat, but as a cultural catastrophe, the moment when a sophisticated civilization was nearly destroyed by foreign invaders who couldn't appreciate what they were destroying. Contemporary Peruvian artists, designers, and craftspeople draw inspiration from Inca patterns, techniques, and aesthetic principles. Traditional motifs appear in modern fashion and home decor, creating continuity between ancient and contemporary Andean culture. The annual Inti Raymi festival, celebrated in Cusco during the June winter solstice, reconstructs Inca ceremonies at the Coricancha and other sites, keeping alive cultural practices that once involved the elaborate use of gold in religious observance. Educational initiatives work to ensure that the history of Inca gold is understood not merely as a tale of conquest and plunder, but as a window into a sophisticated civilization with its own complete worldview. Universities conduct archaeological research that continues to uncover new sites and artifacts, each discovery adding to our understanding of Inca metallurgy, religious practices, and social organization. The question of repatriation, whether artifacts held in foreign museums should be returned to Peru, remains contentious. The controversy surrounding Yale University's decades-long possession of artifacts excavated from Machu Picchu by Hiram Bingham illustrates the complex emotions involved. When Yale finally agreed to return these items in the early 21st century, Peruvians celebrated a victory for cultural heritage, though many noted that the returned objects were primarily ceramic, bone, wood, and textile. The gold and silver, the most valuable materials by European reckoning, had long since disappeared into private collections or been melted down. The history of Incan gold is ultimately a story about how cultural values shape our relationship with material objects. The Incas created some of the finest gold work the world has ever seen, not because they valued gold as portable wealth, but because they understood it as a bridge to the divine. Every golden artifact represented a connection between the earthly and celestial realms, a physical manifestation of the sun god's presence in the world. The craftsmen who created these works weren't simply artisans producing luxury goods. They were engaging in sacred activity, channeling spiritual energy through their skilled hands. The Spanish saw only metal. They measured value in weight and purity, melting away faces of gods and transforming sacred ceremonies into anonymous ingots. In doing so, they destroyed not just objects, but an entire way of understanding the world, a cosmology in which humans lived in intimate relationship with divine forces made manifest through precious metal. Yet the story doesn't end with destruction. The legends of hidden treasures, whether true or not, speak to a deeper truth about cultural resilience. Even in defeat, even in the face of overwhelming force and systematic looting, Indigenous peoples retained the memory of what their treasures meant. They preserved stories, passed down knowledge, kept alive the understanding that gold was more than mere metal. Today, the surviving artifacts in museums around the world, the stonework of the Coricancha, the ongoing archaeological discoveries, and the living traditions of Andean communities all testify to a legacy that couldn't be entirely melted down. The true treasure isn't gold waiting to be found in mountain caves or lake bottoms. It's the cultural heritage that persists, the knowledge of a civilization that achieved extraordinary things and understood the world in ways that continue to challenge and inspire us. As you've journeyed with us through this exploration of Incan gold, from sacred temples to Spanish forges, from mountaintop mines to ocean-crossing treasure ships, we hope you've gained a deeper appreciation for how differently cultures can understand value and meaning. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing to Renaissance Finance for more deep dives into the financial and cultural history of our world. Click that like button if you appreciate the stoic documentary approach we bring to these fascinating historical tales. And share this video with anyone who might be interested in the intersection of culture, economics, and history. The story of Incan gold reminds us that true wealth isn't always measured in precious metal. Sometimes it's measured in the ideas, artistry, and cultural understanding that persist long after the gold itself has been melted away.